Good afternoon. Tēnā koutou katoa, tēnā koutou. I te kaupapa o te wā, tēnā koutou katoa. Tue te rangi, tue te papa, tue te moana, tue tātou. E rangi te pō, e rangi te o, hui e, tāki e. Welcome.
Thank you, Lynn, and welcome everybody to the Packaging Forum and MFE event. Thank you, honourable guests, distinguished guests, specifically Honourable Rachel Brooking. Thank you for making the time to come and speak with us and share the update. I'm Malcolm Evans. I'm the chair of the Soft Plastics Recycling Scheme. I'm also on the Packaging Forum board. I also work with FGC and ARL and, like many people here, multiple projects across the industry. I'm obviously not Rob Langford. He's the good-looking guy with the CEO, but Rob's not feeling at all well today, so I've been asked to step in and help out a little bit. So just a little bit of housekeeping to start off. Bathrooms are out the door and to the right. Fire, please don't panic. There is actually a door here that we can use if we need to, but the recommended is straight out past reception, big green sign, and just out into the car park, please. There are a couple of cars that are parked here, so these first two people might want to go and check the evacuation procedure. Number plates PRF 797 and MCC 499. I'm not sure if those cars are from anyone here, but if you are, if you could please go and move them. I think they're locking people in, so hopefully not. Anyone here? PRF 797 or MCC 499? No? Okay. That's good. All right. So today's agenda, just a quick introduction, then we'll work through the waste industry work program, followed by a Q&A, and then followed after that with some tea and coffee. And if I forget anything, please feel free to jump in. Happy to take comments and suggestions from the floor at any time. Okay, so as I said, my primary role here today is as a board member of the Packaging Forum. A very clever name, the Packaging Forum. You know, the whole idea of a forum is around that facilitation of discussion of ideas and progressing solutions. So that forum concept is really, really important because, you know, it's like that example where many of us have many different roles, that facilitation and working together to progress solutions for New Zealand waste, for recycling, for making sure that all of our businesses are successful, for making sure we're doing the right thing for New Zealand community and New Zealand environment. So that facilitation part, I think, is something that's a really great attribute of the Packaging Forum and something we're very, very proud of. So, and thank you for so many of you that we have worked, because collectively we do seem to be making really good progress for New Zealand in this space. Minister Brooking, thank you for your time recently. It was great to have you in your last trip to Auckland. I was specifically talking about the soft plastics recycling scheme and some of the curbside standardisation, what are the impacts there, and it was really great to have that open dialogue saying, hey look, yep, we're all as stewards. There's a whole lot of, like for example, the soft plastic scheme and the glass scheme, they're both voluntary product stewardship schemes at the moment, and we all understand just how important this whole philosophy of stewardship is, and that's a key part in terms of, for us to look ahead, creating the right outcomes for Aotearoa as a country, as a community, for business and for our people. So it's great to have that open discussion and actually work through what we're all trying to achieve. So without any further ado, if you'd like to join here, and I will take a seat.
It's a lot of water. I don't know how long you're planning for me to be up here. Kia ora koutou, thanks everyone so much for coming along today. Before I start my speech, I do have quite a long speech here, but I do want to say that I haven't been the Minister for Waste for very long, and I really appreciated engaging with many of you in the short time that I have been here. And I did want to make a speech to you to sort of get all the bits of the waste work stream together in one speech to talk about it as a whole, because there's an awful lot that's been going on, and most of it I had no idea about at all until I became the minister. So my poor press secretary and speechwriter Adelia here has had to deal with some very strange diagrams from me that we've tried to get this speech to say in words rather than my scribbles. So hopefully that has worked. I also want to acknowledge I have quite a number of people here from MFE, and they're really keen to engage as well. So when we do the Q&A, I'm not just cheating by having them here. They've also know you, have worked with you for a long time, and are very engaged in these processes. So we've got the Deputy Secretary of Environment, Sam, and Sean, who's the Director and is just everything to do with waste. Michelle, who's got all the money, I think. Yeah. And Steve, who I just met as well, who's working on strategy and legislation. I'm going to talk about legislation, so helpful that he is here as well. Now I'll just move that. So here we go. We all know that New Zealand has a big problem with waste, and working with you is one of the key ways to fixing it. And I don't need to tell you the scale of the problem. New Zealanders are among the most wasteful people on the planet. Every year we send an average 664 kilograms of waste to the tip. One of the major reasons for this is that here only about a third of households' waste is recycled, compared to 2/3 in similar countries. This isn't good enough, and I'm committed to working with you, other parts of the sector, and with the people of New Zealand to turn that around. When I first became the Associate Minister for the Environment responsible for waste issues, I gave a speech in which I said I hated waste. It's true. The idea that we are causing environmental and ecological damage by throwing away what could and should be useful resources really appalls me. Like many of us, I have some experience of dealing with this on a small scale. When my family built our house in Dunedin recently, that was covered in snow today, we put a lot of effort into minimising the waste we produced. It taught me that good intentions are not enough. You need a plan and the resources to implement it. Even at the domestic scale, nagging at your kids, who were, I'm told, at home till at least 10 o'clock today because of that snow, to put those empty milk bottles in the recycling won't work if they have to go out of their way to do it and they can't see the point in it anyway. You've got to take them with you. And that is at the heart of what I want to talk to you about today. One of the things I've learnt in the 3 and a bit months I've been the Minister of Waste is that there are many things that can, in theory, be recycled, but that's not the same as them actually being recycled. In real life, you've got to have the systems in place and the people on board, and that involves trade-offs. I think of it as the margarine lid effect. In theory, margarine lids can be recycled. That is, they're made of stuff that can be recycled. So not unreasonably, some people put them in their recycling bins. The problem is our materials recovery facilities, or what you will all call MRFs, and I've been really fascinated to visit some of those and see how they work, are not set up to deal with them. Margarine lids are flat, they're two-dimensional, not three-dimensional, and the automated machinery that sorts the contents of our household recycling bins and bags thinks they're paper and puts them in the waste paper stream. We could and probably will get machines that can distinguish between a margarine lid and a magazine, but that in itself isn't enough. People come into the equation. Our household recycling regime relies on people's goodwill to make it work. They are the ones that have to wash, sort, and put the recycling out. The problem is, many find it confusing, and what's worse, in my opinion, they don't have faith in its integrity. The waste strategy that my colleague David Parker released earlier this year is dealing with that confusion by standardising the recycling regime across the country. What you can recycle and the way you do it will be the same, whether you're in Kaitaia or Bluff, Auckland or Dunedin. And that does mean we're making some trade-offs because we don't have the ability to recycle everything in every part of the country. The integrity question is tricky too, because if people don't believe that what they're sending out for recycling is actually being recycled, they won't do it. To put it bluntly, if they think that the margarine lid is being burnt in a furnace in Malaysia instead of being turned into a plant pot and pen holders, it's the end of the road. Not only for their willingness to deal with margarine lids, but for everything. And that's the trade-off we have to make, what's physically possible to do against what the public is willing to do. Of course, flat lids are not the only problem. We have to figure out how to deal with aerosol cans and the lids from bottles. And a wee aside here, finding out that the real problem with this is, with leaving lids on bottles, is the fluid in the bottles, which contaminates the recycling process, and that there is a physical solution with a piece of kit that makes a hole in the bottle so the fluid can come out. These are the interesting discussions that you all know about and have regularly. So for me, coming along as a newbie, that's really fascinating. But I digress. The point is that there are lots of technical solutions, and what we need is a plan to introduce them in a practical and affordable way and to bring the public along with us as we do it. So that's what we're doing. The waste strategy is our big plan to get New Zealand to a low emissions, low waste, circular economy by 2050. It's the first time this country has had one, and it's a game changer. Under it, we've got a lot of things happening as we head to the first target of getting the building blocks in place by 2030. There's the rationalisation and standardisation of the curbside recycling scheme, and by 2030, the introduction of curbside collection of food scraps right across the country. There's the work we must do under our climate commitments to reduce emissions from waste. Much of that is funded by the Climate Emissions Reduction Fund, or the CERF, the Climate Emergency Fund, and I was pleased to announce food waste reduction project funding recently. There's the increase in the waste levy, which is generating funds that are being invested in the infrastructure we need, which will be, in the future, based on the Action Investment Plan. We all know that this country has an estimated 2.1 billion to 2.6 billion waste infrastructure deficit, and we can't fix that overnight. Work on the first Action Investment Plan covering the next 3 to 5 years is underway and should be in place in the first half of next year. I expect a draft to be ready for consultation later this year, once the new government is formed, and that engagement will continue with local authorities, the waste management sector, community organisations, iwi Māori and businesses across the sector. The waste disposal levy expansion has recently passed a significant milestone, with the levy on Class 1 landfills increasing from $30 to $50 per tonne and the expansion to Class 3 and 4 landfills on 1 July this year. Class 2 landfills that accept construction and demolition materials have been subject to a levy since July last year. To make sure everyone is doing what they should, we've increased the compliance, monitoring and enforcement capability, and we're keeping a close eye on things to make sure our approach is working. The Waste Minimisation Fund has about 100 applications in progress. They're for a range of projects, including curbside collection assets, infrastructure, and to support the rollout of services for household food scraps and green waste. The government is also supporting the industry in the development of new organic waste processing facilities, construction and demolition resource recovery facilities, and transfer station upgrades. Money from the levy also goes to the Plastic Innovation Fund, and I've been pleased to see some great work being done there. The Plastics Innovation Fund is $50 million over 4 years, forecasted on plastic waste minimisation, also funded from the waste levy. The fund is designed to support the goal of New Zealand's waste strategy, plastics research, innovation and investment priorities, and plastics action plan. 8 projects are now underway, and another 7 have been approved. Together, they're getting $15 million in funding, and those projects range from milk keg systems, which I visited, to reduce the single use of bottles, to recycling farm plastics and expanding new processes for construction and demolition waste streams. Combined, these projects will reduce thousands of tonnes of plastic waste to landfill every year. Expressions of interest for the next round of funding open on November the 1st. On top of this, 68 million from the COVID Response Recovery Fund went into improving recycling sorting at recovery facilities across the country, including 16.8 million for projects to replace and upgrade the optical and supporting sorting equipment in the EcoCentral operated materials recovery facility in Christchurch. This has improved the quality, efficiency and market value of sorting plastic, paper and cardboard from curbside recycling collection from Christchurch, Waimakariri, Selwyn and the Ashburton councils. A further 16.6 million has also gone to Auckland Council for a project to install new sorting infrastructure at the material recovery facility in Onehunga. Also, I've visited that, to improve the separation and quality of plastics, paper and cardboard materials. This project has decreased contamination rates and increased the facility's processing capacity by 40,000 tonnes per annum. So from 140,000 to 180,000 tonnes, meaning more recyclable material can be accepted and processed from outside Auckland. More modern collection and sorting equipment means an increase in the quality and amount of fibre, paper, cardboard and plastic packaging materials that can be sorted. The action and investment plan will provide greater clarity and certainty in respect to investment and infrastructure priorities over the medium term, filling the gap between our longer term strategy and shorter term investment signals. Which brings me briefly here to the container return scheme. I know that some of you would have been unhappy with the decisions earlier this year to not proceed just now with the scheme that was being developed. The problem, or one of the, not the problem, but an issue with the scheme was that it required changes to legislation, either the existing legislation or new legislation to be passed, and it's highly unlikely that we would have been able to do that before Parliament rises. What we are doing, though, is working on new legislation for extended producer responsibility. That would see producer responsibility organisations, new acronym for you, PROs, established, and a Beverages Pro would be able to establish a container return scheme within that legislative framework without a specific law change being needed. The Pro would work through the how questions, like whether the containers are returned to supermarkets or collected in good old-fashioned bottle drives by community groups, or perhaps community facilities such as Wanaka Waste Busters. Now, Cabinet has already agreed to a minimum of 10 cents for a beverage container return scheme, and that hasn't been undone. So to jump back a step and to talk a bit more about that new legislation, it would be called, for now, Responsibility for Reducing Waste Act, RRWA. And as you may be aware, we recently released a number of Cabinet papers seeking policy decisions on the content of the new legislation to replace both the Waste Minimisation Act and the Litter Act. These papers, has anyone had a look at them? I know some of you have. So a few nods here, yep. So these papers detail decisions about legislation to provide tools to move from focusing on managing effects of waste disposal to moving up the waste hierarchy. The government's new waste legislation will support the transformation of Aotearoa New Zealand's waste system. The Waste Minimisation Act and the Litter Act are dated and have limited tools to address our environmental issues. The new legislation will allow us to fix the gaps in the old legislation. It will also help make the waste levy more effective by broadening the scope of what it can apply to and what those funds can be spent on. This includes proactive action to remove vulnerable landfills at risk of being triggered by severe weather events, avoiding incidents such as the Fox River disaster a few years back. And this week, I don't know if this is something that the waste levy would be spent on, but I was in Nelson and they have a similar problem there. And where I'm from in Dunedin, there's similar problems. And in fact, all around the country. The new framework empowers will help improve results for products and materials, enabling the transition to a circular economy. We'll be able to ban certain products, set recycling standards, and make companies responsible for their product's entire life cycle. And I might cover, I'm jumping around my speech here. We'll be able to establish new tools to regulate how the waste management and resource recovery sector operates, including waste tracking, national standards, and national licensing. Ultimately, the legislation will change how we manage resources throughout their life cycle. These are big changes, and we will work with the sector, local government, and the industry as we create tools to address our waste problem. And I just comment here that, those cabinet papers that have gone through and made the policy decisions on this legislation, that there's a lot of work that's gone on. So congratulations to everyone who's been involved in that process. We just now need to make it into a bill. So we intend to progress the new waste legislation through Parliament next term, with an ongoing program to consult on and implement the new regulatory tools. So that's the PROs and things like the container return schemes. Going back to curbside, from February next year, household curbside recycling services will begin to collect the same set of recycling materials across the country. And all urban areas will have that by 2027. So back to my margarine lid issue. 1 in 10 Kiwis believes that all plastics collected in curbside recycling are landfilled, and half believe they would recycle more if they trusted the outcomes of recycling. As well as the infrastructure investment and improving our legislative framework, we need to bring New Zealanders along with us on the journey to improve waste minimisation in this country. We must build trust by ensuring our systems can recycle the materials we collect. And we must build understanding through clearly and consistently communicating what these materials are, avoiding confusion. That is a lovely ringtone. It's very relaxed. So we want to avoid both confusion and contamination. And this is a tricky communications challenge, where we are asking some individuals to recycle fewer in order to, as a country, recycle more. However, people support these changes. Consultation feedback showed strong support, 87% or higher, across all recycling and food organic proposals. And there was a 95% support for collecting a standard set of materials in household curbside recycling and for most of the specific materials in the standard set. I do want to acknowledge some frustration on why particular materials were excluded from the accepted list of materials, namely the likes of aerosols, lids, liquid paperboard, and soft plastics. And that on some materials, companies who produce and use different forms of packaging often have different views to those that have the job of sorting and recycling it. So the principles to guide whether items are included or excluded were: can the item be collected, sorted and recycled safely and effectively through our curbside system? And are there sustainable end markets for the recycled commodities? And does the item affect the quality of other materials or cause contamination? So we must carefully balance these principles against our broader environmental aspirations. And this is because if we jump too far ahead and accept materials at curbside that cannot be widely recycled, we risk losing public trust in and understanding of the system. The curbside standard materials list reflects the current realities of what can currently be successfully recycled via curbside systems in New Zealand. Most of New Zealand's materials recovery facilities do not yet have the technology needed to be safely and effectively process the materials that have been excluded from the standard materials list. However, the government is committed to reviewing and updating the list of materials accepted in the curbside collection system. I recognise that with investment and development in technology and markets, that we can recycle through curbside services, what we can recycle through curbside services may need to change over time. So let's talk about how that would happen. The process for updating standard materials will have to balance packaging design and recyclability, producer responsibility, stability for processes and of end markets, household behaviour with the flexibility to respond to change, and of course the principles I just outlined. I recently asked ministry officials to bring together the various stakeholders with a role to play in curbside recycling, such as the waste sector, manufacturers, packaging sector, councils, businesses and other stakeholders to identify solutions to the current barriers that are limiting what we can and cannot easily recycle in New Zealand. I also note that the mechanism for updating the standard materials list has been designed to be flexible. So it's done through a gazette notice rather than an order in council or primary legislation. To people who love public law, you'll appreciate that that's a simpler process. However, care will need to be taken to ensure that the list of standard materials is not updated too often. And this is because frequent changes would cause public confusion and erode that public trust that I've been talking about. So that's a really careful balance. Finally, on curbside collection, I want to note that there is value in aligning our approach to Australia's and the wider Pacific, opening opportunities for more efficient trade and stronger end markets. And in terms of the Pacific, with our role of helping with our neighbours. However, there are challenges to full alignment. The current Australian government recently committed to working towards curbside standardisation, though this is still at an early stage, and their own list of national standard materials is yet to be announced. This makes alignment decisions in this context challenging. However, I am encouraging officials to continue to look for those opportunities. I'll note here I'm also the Minister for Food Safety, and that system is very much aligned with Australia, which in many ways is wonderful, but we did, it's not a but, a negative but, it's a and, really. We recently I had the ministers over in Wellington, which is great, but being federal is so different in New Zealand, and there are so many ducks to line up in that system, and really the states do almost everything. The Commonwealth takes the money, and they tried to keep telling me what they did, but it didn't seem to make much sense. Anyway, hopefully no one's Australian here. But they were all lovely, and go the Matildas. But it is a complicated system to work with our neighbours. I'm also aware industry are leading work to further roll out the use of the Australasian Recycling Label, ARL, in New Zealand. There is ongoing work to align the Australian and New Zealand versions, however. First and foremost, we must accurately reflect what can be recycled in New Zealand, and we're a lot smaller than Australia. Ultimately, it is essential that we restore public confidence in our curbside recycling system so that New Zealanders have trust that it's worth making the effort to do the right thing. In addition to recycling, all urban areas will have a household curbside food scraps collection by 2030, as well as recycling organic materials such as food or garden waste. It does not need to go to landfill. For example, food waste can be turned into compost, used as stock food, or used to generate energy through anaerobic digestion. Preventing organic waste from being sent to landfill also reduces emissions, with food scraps producing around 22% of the emissions from municipal landfills as they decompose. However, reducing food waste in the first place is the preferable option, with disposal of and value extraction from waste as a last resort. For example, every year we waste enough perfectly edible food to feed more than the populations of both Dunedin and Hamilton. The 157,000 tonnes of food wasted every year in this country could feed 336,000 people for a year. This is a huge waste of money and resources, especially when many people are finding it tough at the moment. That is why I was pleased to recently announce funding from the Climate Emergency Response Fund towards 4 projects working to tackle food waste at its source. These projects include reducing waste in marae-based settings, a voluntary national agreement in which major food businesses commit to reducing food waste, public education on how to cut waste at home, and reducing the amount of food being wasted in large retirement villages and rest homes. Collectively, the projects will receive $4.6 million over 3 years from the fund. Now jumping back to regulated product stewardship. I've already spoken about how the waste strategy and new legislation has a strong focus on responsibility across the whole supply chain. The curbside collection system primarily focuses on recovering materials from the household. The container return scheme was designed to significantly improve recycling for beverage containers, particularly for drinks that are brought, consumed and disposed of when people are out and about. As seen overseas, this would help shift the dial for the recovery and recycling of an estimated 2.57 billion containers we use each year. Sam's nodding at me. From 45% recovered to at least 85%. Product stewardship schemes aim to tackle waste at its source, placing responsibility for managing end-of-life products on producers, importers and retailers rather than on communities, councils, neighbourhoods and nature. And I've just been at the beach this morning with Sean and some others with Sustainable Coastlines, doing a litter survey there. My trousers are still a bit muddy. I was wearing different shoes though, so that's good. Have a look at Sean's shoes if you get a chance. I think he's tried to wash them. But it's amazing. We thought we were doing this survey that they're collecting really good data with this project about how much litter there is on the coastlines, and we looked at the site. We had an area of 67 metres in length and 14 metres width, and we looked at the area. It was Little Shoal Bay. Thought there's not much litter here, but then we collected 230 pieces of litter. So we do have to worry about nature for litter, but of course where we put any waste as well. So in July 2020, government declared 6 priority products under the Waste Minimisation Act. The Ministry for the Environment is progressing regulations to support product stewardship schemes for tyres, large batteries, refrigerants and farm waste. The Ministry is also working with stakeholders to progress scheme designs for wider e-waste and plastic packaging. For example, the Ministry has provided funding to enable the packaging and manufacturing industry, working with others, to design a plastic packaging scheme, aptly named the Plastic Packaging Product Stewardship Scheme Project, or PPPSP, for convenience. This scheme will play a critical role alongside our curbside system in lifting our recovery and recycling of plastic resources. While it's a key part of the system, recycling and resource recovery is much bigger than what happens at the curbside. And just noting with the legislation that I talked about before, the work is ongoing to create that legislation, but at the same time, these product stewardship schemes are still going and the Ministry is still working on them. You will no doubt be aware that a number of single-use and hard-to-recycle plastics are no longer available. Again, this is part of New Zealand's transition towards a circular economy. As a nation, we embraced the 2019 single-use plastic shopping bag ban, which has meant over 1 billion fewer plastic bags ended up in landfills, or the ocean, or the beach, each year. We now focus on the phase-out of more problematic plastic items. Last year, we banned polystyrene takeaway food and drink packaging, single-use plastic drink stirrers and cotton buds, and plastic with pro-degradient additives. In July this year, we banned single-use plastic produce bags and tableware. restricted single-use plastic straws, and began a transition to compostable plastic produce stickers by 2025, which is harder than you'd think it would be. By banning single-use plastic produce bags, we are removing 150 million of these from New Zealand's environment and landfills. That's 17,000 plastic produce bags every hour. In 2025, we'll be banning all other PVC and polystyrene food and drink packaging. These phase-outs will prevent more than 2 billion plastic items going to landfills or into the environment every year. Shifting away from hard-to-recycle packaging like PVC and polystyrene will simplify the materials in circulation and reduce contamination in our recycling system. It will also encourage businesses to make thoughtful choices in replacing the products that are being phased out, to instead use packaging that is reusable or readily recyclable. Again, these phase-outs work directly alongside the other changes I've spoken about today. Our waste reduction program is just one part of our wider environmental reform agenda. Allow me to briefly touch on some other policy initiatives. The emissions reduction plan sets out actions across the country to reduce greenhouse gas emissions across every sector of the economy. The plan set out how New Zealand can meet its first emissions budget, which is 2022 to 2025. The ERP, the Emissions Reduction Plan, puts New Zealand on track to achieve its 2050 target and contribute to global efforts to limit temperature rise to 1.5 degrees. Encouragingly, the last emissions reduction inventory showed that we're on the right track, with emissions from waste reducing between 2020 and 2021 by 0.7%. However, there is obviously more work to do. The second ERP will build on the momentum of the first plan and take us further. Through their recent consultation on its draft advice, the Climate Change Commission has identified the need to focus on the efficiency and effectiveness of landfill gas capture systems, along with a wide range of potential focus areas for the future, including the potential for organic waste disposal bans. We have now built ourselves a strong platform to tackle our country's waste. The different programs I've spoken about today, each serving distinct but complementary purposes. We have a waste strategy to provide a clarity of priorities and targets. We have funding streams and a policy framework to enable investment. We have a comprehensive suite of tools and solutions to address the diverse challenges across different settings, such as homes, businesses, and public spacings. However, I appreciate this remains a deeply technical area of work for our government. In addition to delivering what I've outlined today, we must remain committed to communicating our plans. And today is by no means the only opportunity to do so. I remain committed to our government working alongside yourselves and wider sector to ensure we get this right and communicate it well. There are many challenges ahead, but I think we can say with confidence that the future is looking more positive for waste, or less positive for waste, depending on how you frame that sentence. We must work alongside local authorities, the waste management sector, manufacturers, packaging sector, community organisations, iwi Māori businesses, and critically, New Zealand householders to make this work, working towards a low waste, low emission, more circular economy for Aotearoa New Zealand. Thank you. Now, you coming back up, please? Oh, yeah. We are going to take some questions, and if and the MFE team is here as well. And then, as we said at the start, we'll loiter, don't know, have a cup of tea or something afterwards as well. And I know there's people online as well. Are there people online?
Yes, so I'll take the questions from online for anyone that's listening online. We'll take those last. And Donna, you're going to come down with the mic for questions from the floor. Over to you for questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Minister. I'm Rachel Barker from Plastics New Zealand. I've actually got two different questions. One, you mentioned asking the Ministry to pull together the stakeholders around adding new things back into curbside.
Yeah.
Are you thinking about that as a formal group to be formed, or...?
Sean, do you want to talk to that?
Kia ora. So the details are to be determined, but clearly the Minister has asked us to work with the full supply chain, if you like, from beginning to end for some of those problematic materials that aren't on the standard materials list at the moment, and work out what solutions we can come up with. So details to come on that one.
But do you have ideas for it, Rachel? Like, we're very keen for this to be a two-way dialogue, so if you've got, and if other people have views on that, you know.
Yeah, I mean, the big thing there is making sure that that entire value chain is included, so it's not just brands or recyclers at the other end. It needs to be everybody involved. On to my second question. So greenwashing is a major issue. It's probably one of the biggest problems I see with plastics bans, is the amount of bioplastic that ends up being claimed as being plastic free. So saw one yesterday at the supermarket. Europe is looking at legislation on that. I'm just wondering if our government is considering that at all.
Well, they're included in the ban, in some of the bans.
Oh, they're included, but they're still on the shelves.
Yeah, it sounds to me like a compliance monitoring enforcement
It's a little
type issue. Yeah, so maybe it's a Commerce Commission type inquiry.
So just to clarify, Sean, so we're all saying the same thing. So the biodegradable plastics for produce bags and other things are banned. Then they shouldn't be there.
It's more around the environmental claims that are being made. It's
Ah,
not just
right.
plastics, that was just an example.
Okay.
We see a lot of different ones.
Well, look, I mean, the team can, MFE can talk to this as well, but Europe's, I think, well ahead of us in most things to do with waste. So, you know, their right to repair and different things that they've got there, which is something that we could look at in our new legislation as well, as a tool for those pros. So that's an interesting point. If they have got some legislation, that would be useful for us to work at. Sam, did you want to comment on that?
Just Rachel, I think it's an important issue, and it's one for us, but it is also one potentially that our colleagues in MB or in Commerce Commission will be interested to in terms of marketing. It might be worth, you know, picking up a further conversation around kind of just how big an issue you and the rest of the sector think it is. And what some of the options might be. I think probably getting a bit more clarity around the problem definition is probably the first thing before we kind of would want to commit to launching into any interventions. I think that would be a good first step, though, to sit down and kind of collectively, because there'll be different views around the sector, around the scale and extent of it and what's reasonable to have claimed or otherwise. So I think we'd want to be clear on that before. But yeah, we definitely don't want that getting too far ahead of us. This is a big problem. It's about, it cuts to the point around consumer confidence that the Minister mentioned today.
Yeah. Which I'm quite obsessed about.
I really appreciate Rachel raising that. Equally, the packaging, well, there's not many manufactured here anymore, but the people bringing in packaging are very quickly coining the phrase home compostable. And clearly no one, if they drink a takeaway cup or a coffee off a forecourt, goes home and plants their cup in the garden. So it's one of the most overt things we can see for greenwash. So I suppose it's my plea to you guys is it's happening thick and fast across industry. And the whole compostable, feel good about the environment while knowing that commercial composters don't want it, can't process it. Other than very few commercial composting facilities across New Zealand's a massive problem. A lot of industry is doing really well at trying to advocate for reusable cups, coffee cups, example. And you mentioned it well, Minister, is that it's where it's facilitated and supported, it works really well. But equally, though, through Stadia, through other places, more often than not, we're now starting to see home compostable. My fear for you is it will now then start to pollute through the home compostable bins, or sorry, for the food waste you're trying to roll out. And I know there's a much, talk about a clear message around marketing and trying to get buy-in, that's only going to confuse.
I think everybody is nodding at that, and in terms of the communications around coffee cups as well, I did take a photo. I was thinking of having some slides, but I've been running around the countryside this week, so I didn't make it. But I was in the Kura Lounge in Dunedin the other day, where I spend half my life, and there was the recycling bin, and it had a coffee cup in it with its lid. I just see that everywhere. So we definitely need to do some good comms on just coffee cups in the bin. And your composting point is a good one.
Kia ora, Minister. Thank you very much for your address. I'm Raewyn Blackley from the Food and Grocery Council. I just wanted to pick up a few comments that you made. Firstly, to the point that Rachel's already commented on, we would really welcome a high-level group or forum being set up. I've seen that work very effectively in other sectors where there's been quite a bit of contention about where the tension should go at different ends of the sector, and certainly the feedback from the brand owners and my members would be that we definitely need to look at the entire chain and make sure that the tension is fairly distributed. And there is a perception that particular sectors may be determining decisions that could be negotiated or navigated more creatively. Mm-hmm. So we're very keen to be part of the solution to that and bring constructive ideas and take our responsibility as brand owners and decision makers where we can, but in an equitable way along the whole chain, which should actually, as you say, be a circle. But we're not quite there yet.
So on that point, thank you.
Secondly, I think picking up that you have recognised the areas of frustration very accurately. So it's good to know that our representations to your officials at Ministry for the Environment have been effective, because you picked up all of the concerns that we've been...
You've also been quite direct
yes.
with me as well.
Oh, that's part of my job. So that's good. We've heard it echoed back, so that's fantastic. And we, are disappointed that we can't work through some of those before February. And we know that our members will be concerned about the impact of that, and we look forward to accommodation of lead times on the way that they've ordered product that they won't be able to cancel orders. We do want sunscreen to be available in New Zealand, for example, and other aerosol products, so we just need to work through that in a pragmatic way, and we're confident that your officials will do that. But I would, want to be fair to my members to make sure that we voice that concern publicly as well. Okay. And the Trans-Tasman bit, I think, is an opportunity that we need to be mindful of with the Australasian recycling label, and making sure that as the Australian complicated machinery of government looks at what they can do, we work really constructively with our sector over there as well. The Australian Food and Grocery Council is very open to working with us on solutions there as well.
Right.
So just really wanted to pick up on all of those points and look forward to the instigation of that forum or group in the future, and us being a big part of that on behalf of the members that we represent.
Yeah,
thank you.
Thank you, Raewyn, for that. And, I see a bit of Raewyn because she also is there with my food safety hat on as well. And there are interesting logical synergies there with that we already have. All of our nutritional food labelling is the same, so why not the recycling labelling as well? As long as we can recycle it in New Zealand and we don't upset that household consumer and have it going to landfill.
Kia ora, Minister. Barney Irvine from the Waste and Recycling Industry Forum. Nice to see you again, and thank you. I suppose a comment and a plea more than a question. One thing I didn't hear you touch on in your speech was data. You may have, and I may have missed it. But look, I guess just to say, we've been putting a lot of time into this over the last 6 or 7 months or something, and particularly over the last few weeks. And I've just been deep in the rabbit hole for some time with that. And I guess what it's just highlighted to me is how little is out there. We've been trying to gather an industry data set. We've really been flying blind and been struck by the scale of the gaps out there, and just what that means in terms of the limitations it puts on us to understand how we're performing and how we compare to the rest of the world. And I know that the team has a big work stream underway and lined up, but really just to emphasise that the criticality of it.
Thank you for that. Yes, we agree with the importance of data and that Sean's team is doing a lot of work on that. Do you want to talk about that? I've got a microphone. You can come here as well.
Yeah, thanks, Barney. I think anyone in the room who's been in waste for any amount of time will recognise that data has always been a problem. There is a piece of work. It's actually led by Glenn Wigley's team in the data space. We have new data regulations coming in with the expansion of the levy and bringing in the other types of landfills. We'll be getting data through the online waste levy system and the tools system as well. So there are definitely current activities underway, but also hear your point about the need for better data that gives us better insights about the impact of our policies and decisions, but also how we're stacking up across the Tasman and across the world.
To just add to that, Barney, I hadn't seen it until the other day, the document that you put out, the statistics that the forum released. So I just wanted to say thank you, appreciate you guys spending some time as a group pulling that together and a chance to connect with you over the data. And just I've asked the team to have a look at it, because there are some differences in terms of the numbers, and so it's really quite keen for us to sit down and make sure I understood what the why they varied, what something was, or what those differences might be.
Probably just send you the updated version.
Right. Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks, Barney.
Minister Nigel Benton, Vice President, Auckland Master Builders. I've been working a lot with the team at ESRC out of Unitec, and just you go on about the construction waste, the packaging that we're getting, especially around plumbing fit-offs and things like that, the amount of plastic and polystyrene, I mean, it's just massive. And we need to work on reducing that. Also, talking about supermarket plastic bags and things. Well, the last development we did was 8 terrace houses, and out of that, just with the pre-nails alone, was 86 sheets of plastic.
Really?
Yeah, and also what you're getting is every delivery from a merchant is covered in plastic, which is single use. Some of that's half an hour down the road, and it's got plastic bands around it. They get cut off and thrown straight into landfill unless someone knows what we're doing. So we're working on reducing that. We're going to frame and truss manufacturing plants, trying to get them to reduce or not use it at all. So we're trying to do that more than, like you say, biodegradable stuff, which they tend to be wanting to use. So it's very hard, but we do need a bit of help with that. And obviously there's a lot of talk in the construction sector and a lot of, what do we call them, workshops, I suppose. So much talk and we get nothing happening. So, I think with us, what we've got industry knowledge, and we've got also the practical part of it, and we are making a difference. But of course, it's all unfunded. So, we just need that funding to go to the right people. So, yeah, hopefully people will notice. Thank you.
Thank you for that. As an anecdote, when I was building my house with some of your colleagues down south, we were able, because Dunedin's small as well, and I knew the person who owned the shop where the placemakers, because they were my neighbour, because it's Dunedin. We just said, don't put the plastic wrap on. But which was actually quite a simple thing to do, but I understand not everywhere works like that. And you have rain.
Yeah, placemakers, cars, ITM, there's some good stuff coming through, but it's a lot of education. You just got to push so hard to make that happen.
Yeah.
Our latest job, we recycle, repurpose 91% of the waste of our development.
Great.
It is possible.
And you're telling everyone in the sector about that as well?
Yeah, we are.
Great.
But I think, recycle is used far too much.
Yeah.
We need to, recycle's okay if it goes back into itself. But as soon as you tell people it's recyclable, then you've got a whole new feedstock coming in, and that's turned into something else. So we need to stop that.
Yeah, and agree totally. Do any of you want to comment on the construction?
Well, to make both Michelle and I, first of all, just to recognise the scale of the issue in the building sector, and appreciate there is a lot of proactive work being done by some parts of the supply chain, some players, but it's a big, big issue. And the scale, the volume is enormous. Yeah. I think probably as an organisation we would have said that.
Tim, do you want to pop up here?
Sorry, Sean's been has been advocating for some time for us to really trend towards focusing more on building construction and demolition waste, just given the scale of the problem. So I think you'll find that we're going to be open to working with the industry. I might just, on this issue going forward, and really after your ideas, Michelle, there's probably a few projects that you might...
And what about the pros? Would you see a role for a pro?
Like a product producer responsibility organisation, maybe. We haven't made, there isn't a mandatory scheme that relates to building materials at this point.
Sorry, just to interrupt, because actually the plastic packaging product stewardship scheme, just to confirm that the building sector will be captured. Sorry, the plastic packaging product stewardship scheme will also pick up plastic products that are wrapped in plastic and packaged in plastic. So it will be subject to
Tony's nodding.
To a PRO at some point. I don't know if Lynn or Tony want to comment on that at all.
It would depend on whether it's defined as packaging or not, because there's the shroud around the house was not packaging.
Yeah, I think the point here was though that the wrap that building materials are arriving in, rather than the plastic wrap that's around. Yeah.
I've got another mic here.
Thanks. Francis from Transcontinental Packaging. We produce a lot of plastic. We produce a lot for food, but I can't put it back into food to recycle it. So one way in which I can do that is through standards, is I can put it back into building materials. So a lot of the wrap that you're getting at the moment is actually over 50% recycled content. Where we struggle is we go, hey, bring it back. Then everyone goes, no. And we, they all duck for cover because no one wants to be accountable for what they're using, which is really to protect the timber so that people can build sound houses.
So sorry. So you're the people who wrap the houses.
Well, we produce packaging for food and non-food companies. We can put, because of the food standards, we can only put recycled content into non-food packaging.
I see.
So we do hundreds of tons, actually. But we don't get it back. So we've said to different recyclers and logistic companies, can we work with you? And we don't get anywhere. And I think everyone's sort of waiting for the government to fund things, but also they don't really put their foot forward. So, to be a little blunt, there's a lot of companies that are trying, but there's some companies that are still talking. So, we're happy to work with you all. Certainly we talk to a lot of people. We see our place as being a real integral part of that recycling, but it only goes so far if we can't get it back. And we're happy to. We're burning through equipment to use recycled content at our cost, because we see that as good PR. I get to stand up, I get to tell you my company in front of you all. But we're actually proactively doing that. So we talk to you guys, it's about using the same materials that we can put back through. So, we're keen and we're part of the conversation, but just remember that the plastic you get is actually recycled from someone else that can't currently. Thanks.
Yeah, and we're happy to talk with everybody if we can find a way through that. So you're happy to talk with us. Thank you.
Great.
Some questions from the...
Questions from online? There's one around data, which I think you've answered. Will New Zealand free trade agreements be amended where needed to enable commensurate product responsibility to be imposed on importers and domestic manufacturers?
Yeah, Rachel knows the answer, please take it. Other Rachel?
Include mechanism for environmentally related regulations around that.
Yeah, there is. So Rachel was just saying about both the FTAs have a lot of environmental provisions in them. What exactly they say about recyclability, though, I'm not 100% sure, except that, do you know, Sarah, do you know that? No. Do you know, Rowan?
I know that this is an issue that we've recently raised with your officials about
Okay.
the importance of the Ministry for the Environment officials talking to MFAT officials and making sure that both when we are importing and exporting products, trade restrictions are considered internationally, and then when we get to the waste end, what we are exporting is sometimes considered a food, has a biosecurity risk unless it's processed into flake or pellets. And so we need to look at all of that complexity and make sure that the trade side of it is considered, because the New Zealand government will want to have a balanced decision-making trade-off between what's right for the country, and our members in the food manufacturing area will want to have clarity, and given how important export is to our economy, we're going to need to work through that very carefully. So I think it's work to be done, but we're advocating with your officials to make sure it's joined up.
Have you got any examples, Rowan, of where you think that might be a problem, or a hypothetical example is fine? Just trying to, or Tony?
Could I suggest that where it may be a problem is in some of your older trade agreements. And when I say older, the China trade agreement, for example, has been there for quite some time now.
Yeah.
Versus the European agreement or the UK agreement, which are very new agreements, and have been able to build on the best practice and knowledge from older agreements. So the older agreements that exist out there are the ones I think probably will have to be taken significant insight and care about.
So what are the types of things you're worried about?
Well, you may be importing product out of China today that does not meet
our standards.
Absolutely, don't meet our standards.
But are you worried about vice versa?
Or vice versa as well. Okay.
So what sort of things are you worried about in terms of exports?
Well, you've got to make sure that what you're exporting out isn't in breach of their regulations.
There's also a component of other countries having an ability to be ahead of us, as you've already referenced.
Yes, and West Europe.
And therefore that trade
might be a barrier.
Will be a barrier to trade, and we need to make sure that we're mindful of that and investing enough in that so that we catch up, but also that when we're negotiating trade agreements, that aspect is really advocated for very heavily. Now, I'm on the board of the International Business Forum, which is a trade-focused organisation, so there are connections being made there, but it's really important that MFE and MFAT are in lockstep about this and talking to industry about what they need for the future.
Yeah, okay.
This becomes a classic trade barrier in terms of non-tariff barriers, the NTBs that are, they've exploded since COVID. But they were always a problem, and we were fighting them very hard. I worked for a long time in the APEC environment, and NTBs were absolutely a point of focus. I can assure you it's no better today, it's much worse.
Right.
So you just got to make sure that you're not opening up opportunities for countries or regions that you've signed agreements with to actually put non-tariff barriers in place.
Indeed.
Through not meeting these regulations.
No, I totally agree with the problem definition. But MFE works with foreign affairs.
So there's a long history too. New Zealand looking to avoid, other countries seeking competitive advantage through, non-tariff barriers, and we've always, hunted as a pack of agencies on that. So specific examples, bring them to us, and we can definitely talk to MFAT. So that's on the export side. On the import side, so very conscious that we are looking to build a more circular economy here in New Zealand, and building that system and the expectations around what that might mean for manufacturers here and the supply chain here in New Zealand. Certainly don't want to be undermining that through applying a different set of expectations to imports, or not applying the same sort of expectations to imports. So again, we're very alive to that, because we could be doing a great job in building a circular system here that's getting undermined by imports that don't have to meet the same requirements. So where that is a problem, or you think there are issues emerging, yes, please let us know so we can kind of build that into our policy thinking and our investment prioritisation as well.
May I suggest that one starting point could be the one that's been discussed already, which is around the recyclability into food packaging. You may find today that there's some food products imported into New Zealand that may be using recycled packaging in the food packaging. How do we know that? Does it meet the FSAN's provisions around that, etc., etc.?
Probably not.
Yeah, the answer.
That one back to you.
We don't know is the answer.
Yeah.
Right.
It's not quite simple.
That gives a really good lead into a specific example where
We do have a potential technical barrier to trade to Europe, and that is around the recycled content provisions that will be coming in Europe. Raywin, you may know the specifics on this one. It's got something to do with the authority to actually approve it in New Zealand. We don't have one. So until that's sorted with MPI or whoever, we actually will hit a wall in terms of exporting anything to Europe at some point.
The challenge we have there, which has been in direct conversation with Glenn Newman on this, is that FSANs themselves have not yet sorted this out. So you're not able to get a provision in there because they haven't actually reached their own conclusions.
Sorry, Tony, for those of us who don't know, what's FSANs, please?
Food standards in Australia and New Zealand.
Thank you.
Very important to all of them.
That's right.
one question through the chat.
So industrial scale technology for circular economy is commercially available to buy now. So what's the advantage of waiting 26 years?
Oh, it costs a lot, I think, is the answer, isn't it?
Sorry.
Oh, if I've got the question right. So I was making notes about recycled plastic.
Circular economy now rather than 2050, which is
If we can buy plant now, if we can buy plant now that's available, why is the waste strategy out for 26 years? It's no question.
Money bags? Can I say? Oh, so. No magic money trees.
Yeah, so there's my first question would be, what is the technology? Because I know that there are still technologies that are theoretically possible but haven't been commercialised yet. So commercial viability and true sustainability of those technologies, and the obvious other point is who's going to pay for it.
But it's also great that we have the waste levy, right? And that it's hypothecated at the moment, and so there is all this funding coming into the waste infrastructure and various different projects at the moment that wasn't there, a couple of years ago.
I'm not sure 100% I've got the context of the question, but I think the 2050 objective is pretty ambitious, and we are a very, very long way from being fully circular economy at the moment. So if you think about all of the different material streams and waste streams throughout our communities and the various supply chains, we've got a long way to go, and there will be some technologies as it is now will help with some of those material streams, others that will still need to emerge to help with others. So there's quite a lot of work to do with it. So we feel fully circular by 2050 seems a reasonably ambitious message as far as what we're trying to do over the longer term, but really over what we're trying hard to focus on probably is what we're doing over the next sort of 8 to 10 years, through to 2030, and we'll set some targets through to 2030 because we felt that those shorter term horizons are the ones that people in the sector can really focus in on actually, what it means in practice.
But also, we're never going to get a circular economy just with technology. It requires a lot of behavioural change. Yeah.
There's a very important point, if I may, there as well for New Zealand, and that's the issue of scale.
Yes.
Because reaching something by 2050 will be very reliant upon the scale that we have to actually use these new technologies. That's not so obvious today.
No, that's right. Sarah.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you for a great speech and a really good engagement. You'll be unsurprised to know that my question is around container return schemes. And I just wanted to clarify what I think I understood, which is that under the Responsibility for Reducing Waste Act, mandatory EPRs will be required for beverage. And I think what I heard you say was that a Beverages Pro could create a container return scheme as opposed to a container return scheme being mandatory. So I just wanted to clarify, would it be a container return scheme, or would alternative EPRs be something that could be created under a Beverages Pro?
Sorry, Sarah, thanks for the question.
Yep, you go for it.
So the legislation sets up a framework, essentially, and Steve will correct me if I get this wrong, that provides a bunch of tools. So at the moment we already have product stewardship provisions that are available under the Act. They're not very particularly well designed for the purposes of having a reliable, robust container return scheme. So we're essentially modernising the EPR framework so that you would have a range of different kinds of EPR schemes that you could enable or set up under the new Act, including schemes similar to what we have at the moment under the product stewardship schemes, but also other types of schemes such as a container return scheme. So, there are lots of variations on schemes that sit somewhere within that family of EPR. So what we're trying to do is set up a framework that gives you a range of different tools for establishing extended producer responsibility scheme, of which a container return scheme or deposit return scheme, if you like, is one of those available schemes. So an incoming government, if they wanted to set up a container return scheme, after the legislation was passed, would then have the tools to enable the details of that scheme to be established via regulations, if you like.
So they'd set up the pro, and then the pro would do the container return scheme or other methods.
And is there a time frame on that?
We need to introduce and then pass some legislation first. So.
Well, that's what I mean.
The time frame. I mean, the hope had been to introduce legislation this term. We've got 3 more sitting weeks, so that's not happening.
That's the broader waste legislation.
Yeah. Oh no, this is it. This is it. It's part of it. Yeah.
So EPR is enabled through the new legislation.
I think that there are different concepts and terms that have, we've previously talked about product stewardship. I think it was the Europeans started talking about extended producer responsibility. It seems to be the modern term that captures quite a lot of different schemes that essentially place greater responsibility on the supply chain to take responsibility for its material. And then within that there are different forms, some such as existing product stewardship schemes that we've got, some that involve a deposit or an incentive on the consumer, such as a container return scheme. They all live within that family. All will be possible under the new legislation as a potential form of EPR, a container return scheme. Probably the key distinguishing characteristic is that it involves that deposit being placed to incentivise the individual to return, whereas the other product stewardship schemes we have at the moment don't work that way.
Does that answer your question, Sarah?
I think so. I'm just not.
We need a diagram, don't we, of this? Yeah.
So are you saying that a container return scheme, if it was brought in, would not be compulsory for all beverage containers?
No, you would have design choices within the legislative framework. So you could try to set up a container return scheme under the WMA. It's just that at the moment the provisions of the WMA probably would leave you with some holes in that scheme. So it wasn't designed really with the kind of container return scheme that we kind of developed up in mind. So, Sarah, I think the best way to just sort of answer that, I think, is to say the legislation will enable you to do a bunch of things. You have to go through a regulation-making process to do those things, to establish the parameters of a container return scheme or a future product stewardship scheme, and have to make decisions at that point about, do you have a deposit? Is it mandatory? What parameters for network design would you be requiring? Do you have mandatory return to retail or not? So those are the design elements of a scheme that would need to be worked up within a legislative framework that enables that to happen. If you understand?
But so it's for the pro to decide whether it be mandatory.
Yeah, well, I think
via regulation.
That's right. They work through the details of the network operation, etc.
And can I just check? So you've announced the legislation that has to be drafted. Then it has to go through select committee first reading select committee process, where we would all be able to make submissions, and if we felt that you didn't have it right as the government of the day, noting we have an election coming up, Then we would make submissions, then you would consider those through the process, the Act would be enacted, and then the regulation process starts. So this is a lengthy process.
Yeah.
And industry and a forum that might come together would be a really critical part of making submissions throughout that process. So there's lots of water to go under the bridge.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think this two-stage, that's quite important to understand. You've got to set up the legislative framework that then enables a second-tier regulatory process to implement the details of the scheme. And actually then you've got to operationalise it.
But the Cabinet already has made the policy decisions on that legislation, but it hasn't gone to be drafted yet.
I think we'll just take the last question from Graham and then we'll allow the Minister to go over for 10.
Am I loitering?
Okay, just the one thing I'm not clear on is the time frame. That, going back to Rachel's question, was when? So when would that be introduced as a bill?
Okay, so depends if we're in government, I can speak to that. Which, why would we not? So, because we're doing such great things on waste, which everybody knows about. So it would be, I presume, it would be drafted over some of the drafting would happen over the break, the electoral break, and so we'd be hoping to introduce it early next year.
So it means what, 9 months, 12-month process?
Yeah, so the standard, so in the standing orders, you send something off for 6 months is the standard time frame for select committee process to hear those submissions and make their amendments, and then it depends on the rest of the legislative agenda how long it takes to get the committee stage through, and then the third reading, and that would depend on how much political support there was for it as well. Things can go quicker if people support them and you have a nice collegial committee stage.
Thank you very much. Thank you for all of you, the team from the Ministry for Environment, answering so many questions and so openly as well. Really appreciate it. I think we've got time. We've got tea and coffee in the lobby, and
lovely.
If you're able to stay with us for a while and talk to people, that would be fantastic.
Great. Thank you.